Good afternoon, and thank you very much for these kind words. I have to first to thank my friends and colleagues for this kind invitation. I feel very honored to talk to you today here, and I apologize that I am talking in English and not in Spain, but if I shall be sure that you understand what I'm talking about, it is better when I do it in English and not in Spain. Well, talking about the future can be both hypothetical and banal. Hypothetical when we confine ourselves only to assumptions, and banal when developments are simply predictable. However, when discussions on the future of art bibliography started a few years ago, in 2010, the situation was different. It was barely possible to outline a convincing scenario, hypothetical or predictable, apparently because art bibliography, at least in the traditional sense of the term, has for many years been of low interest in discipline-specific considerations on working methods and standards. While library catalogs have undergone a radical metamorphosis in the last 20 years of digital revolution, the very old bibliography format, dating back to previous centuries, has kept its original concept more or less unchanged, even in electronic form and with online availability. As long as the established and consolidated standard works have been obtainable, questions about their future have hardly been formulated. However, when the financial crisis of 2009 provoked the cessation of publishing the highly esteemed and most comprehensive bibliography of the history of art, shortly before it was renamed to International Bibliography of Art, IBA, scholars, librarians, curators, and information specialists started to ponder not only the consequences for their daily work, but also the principle of bibliographic services in general. Thus, the future of art bibliography gained center stage in the discipline, at least for a certain time, and a working group of the same name was established. Before turning to the future, however, I would like to go back to the past in order to explain what I'm talking about here in more detail and to make it more comprehensible why this topic is so important for our self-understanding as art librarians. Bibliographies in general, and those focused on art literature in particular, have a long tradition which goes back to the early modern period. They have always served as important, if not indispensable, instruments for scholars in the form of a summary and structured overview of relevant academic literature and source books. In the era of Enlightenment, the distinction between different types of bibliography became relevant. The enumerative, periodically updated model on the one hand, and the analytical, critically commented selection on the other. At the beginning of the last century, this important differentiation was expressed in other words, when systematic was opposed to critical, and enumeration to classification, respectively. Of course, there were many overlaps and interpenetrations in this dualism. However, all variations were based on one important principle: the bibliographer's professionalism and high level of expertise. In short, bibliography was regarded to be a challenging science. Another characteristic was and is its independence from holdings and location. Thus, bibliographies are normally more comprehensive than library catalogs, and their destination is, by definition, a widespread dissemination. All these topics were unified in the above-mentioned BHA, Bibliography of the History of Art, or International Bibliography of Art, IBA. In one respect, it belonged to the category of enumerative or systematic lists, but at the same time, the records reveal noticeable expertise and professional competence. The standard BHA record consisted of three elements: the bibliographic description, based on library cataloging rules, the abstract, and the classification. However, the way bibliographic information was collected and amalgamated was remarkably different to previous times. An impressive network of about 60 people and 50 institutions in Europe and North America, an annual budget of $1 million in recent years, and an advisory board with high-ranking scholars provided the basis for an annual production of 24,000 records. There was no other comparable bibliographic tool in art history, and hundreds and thousands of art libraries all over the world made available the growing number of blue volumes on their shelves, since scholars were reliant on this unique source. One further feature must be emphasized. Around 75% of the entries produced in 1 year were related to articles from journals and collective writings, and only 15% to monographs. This was the most essential distinction to library catalogs, which usually concentrate on monographs. Only in a few exceptional cases are articles catalogued systematically and on a noteworthy quantitative level. In contrast, the list of journals indexed regularly in the BHA comprised 1,200 titles. Other important bibliographies should also be mentioned to highlight their outstanding quality by concentrating on articles, such as Art Index, Avery Index to Architectural Periodicals, and Art Bibliographies Modern, whose indexes cover a broad number of international art journals. They thus provide complementary services to the monograph-oriented library catalogs. Here we are talking about the pre-internet era, when bibliographies were printed in thick volumes and library catalogs mainly consisted of small drawers with thousands of paper cards. The situation started to change in the mid-1990s when art libraries began to build up electronic catalogs and, in a second step, to interconnect them with bibliographic data from other art libraries or to integrate them in regional or national consortia. Speaking here to a professional audience dominated by librarians, it is certainly not necessary to tell you the story of how electronic catalogs were established in libraries and how they differ from the old card catalogs. It is sufficient to point out how this new development influenced their traditional relationship with bibliographies. In the first instance, the framework conditions of the two bibliographic sources started to lose their clear former distinction. One first assimilation was the new local independent access to library catalogs and their simultaneous availability worldwide. Another important step towards convergence consisted of the new option of network-based interoperability between diverse libraries and the consequent sharing of cataloging work. The outcomes were union catalogs with a considerably more comprehensive amount of data and the economization as well as the acceleration of operative routines. As we mentioned before, one of the decisive factors in the successful balance of the BHA was the huge operative network of experts. To a certain degree, this phenomenon began to determine the quality of the networked union catalog of libraries as well. Furthermore, the merging of libraries with individual collection profiles in union catalogs remarkably extended the coverage of subject areas. However, we must not forget the outstanding feature of distinction between bibliographies and library catalogs as shown above. Bibliographies consider the indexing of articles from journals and collective writings to an unmatched higher degree than library catalogs. There are, however, important exceptions in the library world that again relativize the principal distinction between bibliographies and catalogs. Focusing on the arts, we have to acknowledge the particular service of the Cubicat Consortium, based on 4 important German research libraries in Florence, Munich, Paris, and Rome, whose union catalog contains more than 800,000 entries related to articles, and whose list of indexed journals covers around 1,500 titles. Currently, circa 800 international journals are indexed regularly, albeit often only selectively. Such a balance is attainable thanks to network-based operability and the division of common work processes, which both became standards in the 1990s. However, in fairness, it must be said that hitherto, the coverage of journals indexed in bibliographies has not been achieved by library catalogs, even when interconnected in networks. On the other hand, it is evident that the characteristic features of bibliographies, their local independent availability, their comprehensiveness, and their up-to-dateness have increasingly lost their exclusiveness, and that electronic library catalogs, in particular when joined in consortia, steadily became a serious alternative to traditional bibliographies, although intellectual control as well as formal uniformity and continuity might not be on the same level in library catalogs. However, the fact that further players have become relevant in recent years should not be overlooked. The spectrum of bibliographic sources can be decisively more multifaceted when so far unknown services like portals to academic literature, such as JSTOR, EBSCOhost, and others, based on citations, table of content services, or the full-text indexing of digitized publications, came into play and enrich the supply of bibliographic information with the help of machines. Finally, generic search engines such as Google Scholar or Google Books also obtained relevance, increasingly for the humanities. But of course, the latter sources are multidisciplinary and thus less applicable for specific researches. Furthermore, the philosophy of their concept is far removed from the traditional principles of pre-selection and unvaried formal standards so characteristic for bibliographies. On the other hand, library catalogs, if generic or specialized, started to extend their services considerably when entries showed an increasing tendency to transform into manifold information clusters, offering tools and sources that were both unknown in bibliographies and capable of significantly elevating the quality of the bibliographic information. We are talking about tables of content, abstracts, reviews, publisher summaries, book covers, and the like. Moreover, in the era of data exchange and data merging in union catalogs, the list of subject headings and classification codes coming from different sources can refine and complete content descriptions, even though the conformity of rules and the consistency of the descriptor language are not, of course, guaranteed. But is this really a serious problem? What seems to be more important is the phenomenon of the conjunction, complement, extension, and enrichment of bibliographic information in library catalogs which is apparently advancing more towards quantitative than qualitative consequences. However, before conjecturing further future developments, I would first like to bring into play the international network artlibraries.net, since it plays a central role in the FAB, the Future of Art Bibliography initiative, and should therefore be analyzed properly. One could even argue that the FAB initiative and the future bibliography model I will present to you shortly would either not or hardly be possible without the experience of artlibraries.net and without the commitment of the members of its steering committee. Again, allow me first to go back to the past in order to better explain the future. The beginnings of artlibraries.net were rather modest. Based on the light federated search architecture of the CGI script protocol of the well-established Karlsruher Virtueller Katalog, the first version of our virtual catalog of art history, launched in 1999, virtually unified the catalog entries of the art historical holdings of 2 German university libraries and the Young Kubikat Consortium. At this time, it was the most efficient way, and also the most economical, to integrate a substantial number of physically distributed bibliographic records in one search process, and to create discipline-specific access to the related literature. The political and historical background was the lack of a central national art library in Germany, and the idea was to offset this fact in the form of the distributed and coordinated acquisition of art literature in 7 outstanding German art libraries. The online catalogs of these libraries were virtually unified under the roof of the Virtueller Katalog Kunstgeschichte in the following years, together with a couple of other catalogs which seemed to serve as a useful complement to the discipline-specific profile of the core group. However, with this, so to speak, innocent approach of unifying a small number of locally dispersed but conceptually related catalogs, discussion started among the participants on the definition of goals and the policy of gaining further partners. This was the situation in 2003, when 2 different positions hardened: aggregation versus selection. The advocates of aggregation were interested in connecting as many German art library catalogs as possible and making the virtual catalog a gateway to their holdings. The other party's idea was the rather sophisticated and vitally convincing concept of a virtual bibliography, grounded on the holdings of selected and subsidiary related art libraries, without any national restriction, of course. Thus, the first international partners, such as the Florentine Iris Consortium, came into play. In the subsequent years, this path was followed with unexpected success, even in an intercontinental dimension. Over the last 4 years, not only has the number of partners grown considerably to currently more than 90 libraries in 15 countries on 4 continents, but the meta search engine also includes targets like Google Books and the Hathi Trust. Artlibraries.net is thus an example of a machine-supported aggregation of bibliographic data derived from locally dispersed heterogeneous sources. However, the joining of the catalogs follows a concept, although in a rather flexible manner, and the sources or targets have been selected not by chance. Currently, there are around 12 million records in the virtual data pool, referring not only to books, but also to hundreds of thousands of journal articles, reviews, auction catalogs, and special collections. As a result, a federated search over so many different sources merges bibliographic information, which can be very comprehensive and can include so far uncommon formats like open access publication, digital collections, images, and the like. All in all, we can conclude that artlibraries.net has over the last 12 years come to be an impressive bibliographic tool, as well as a unique international communication and collaboration network. On the other hand, the model of artlibraries.net also has shortcomings. There is much redundancy in the hits, for example. The result list can be very long and hard to manage. The quality of the records is heterogeneous and sometimes disappointing, in particular when subject indexing is concerned. Of course, no claim can be laid to completeness when the search results fully depend on the holdings of the participating libraries. Furthermore, it should not be concealed that the current technical infrastructure has several disadvantages due to the fact that the large number of connected target systems can cause long waiting times in displaying the results. Moreover, convenient selective navigation through the sometimes long and confusing hit lists is not possible. On the other hand, we have explained above that the collection and merging of relevant information from different sources, as well as a complement with further data and formats in union catalogs, epitomizes a reality whose benefits should be acknowledged. Thus, it is incontestable that library catalogs, in particular when united in networks, at least partially fulfill services that were formerly reserved to bibliographies. However, they do it in another manner, based on new principles of generating and evaluating information on the one hand, and of integrating users with a more active role in selecting and filtering the bibliographic data they are looking for on the other. Undoubtedly, this can only be done with the appropriate tools, and it must be admitted that artlibraries.net shows a deficit, particularly in this respect. Anyway, the crucial question was not whether a library consortium can substitute a traditional bibliography and make it superfluous, but rather what role should library catalogs play when future models for bibliographic services are developed, and how the traditional format of a bibliography could be integrated in such a scenario. This, by the way, was in line, even if unconsciously, with a vision expressed by Michael Reinhardt, the former editor-in-chief of the Bibliography of the History of Art, as early as in 1969, when he argued in favor of a computerized central bibliography without the traditional distinctions of selectiveness and exhaustiveness. 25 years before the Internet was born, Reinhardt had recognized how efficient computers are in managing big masses of data, and he foresaw the consequent turn towards a post-selective strategy of filtering specific results out of a rather unspecific pool of information. I'm quoting Reinhardt, a central bibliography would collect and compile all the material available and provide in turn the basis for every kind of specialized, critical, and selective bibliography, whether local or topical. Undoubtedly, Reinhardt was still far from propagating an amalgamation of bibliographies and library catalogs. However, his plea for international cooperation based on a computerized network and his recommendation to identify area common among libraries, abstracting and indexing services and bibliographies, so the common areas, were important anticipations of discussions we are leading today, more than 40 years later. Let me now return to the year 2010, when exits from the previously mentioned art bibliography crisis were on the agenda. To come straight to the point, the cessation of publishing the IBA, the International Bibliography of Art, for financial reasons only triggered awareness of the substantial lack of a future-proofed concept for an appropriate bibliography format for our discipline, particularly in view of the dramatically changing conventions of publishing and supplying various and also new forms of information and knowledge. As mentioned at the beginning, the FAB working group was established for the purpose of developing alternative models to traditional bibliographies, but always in full awareness that the outcome should and could not resemble a follower of the old IBA. What we had in mind was rather a creative realignment of the available sources by applying modern technology and communication networks. Thus, it was more or less a matter of course that from the beginning onwards, the FAB group has been in close and continuous communication and collaboration with the steering committee of artlibraries.net. By 2011, the members of both circles had already discussed the new concept of an umbrella under which single areas of responsibility should be unified to something like a discovery environment. Without doubt, this was admittedly a theoretical approach, and it lacked clarity concerning technical feasibility. Furthermore, a financial basis for such an ambitious project was missing, and an attempt to attract funding from corresponding promoting institutions remained abortive. Consequently, the Getty Research Institute, the driving force in the FAB initiative, started to work with its own forces and means, at least on parts of the concept. In so doing, in 2012, it was possible to launch one of the 3 columns of the FAB architecture, the portal to digitized sources, thanks to an international collaboration of institutions in the US and Europe. The central matter of the FAB concept, the development of a new bibliographic tool, thus remained stronger in the hands of the artlibraries.net group, since its virtual catalog, as we have described before, achieved decent capability in the meanwhile, and it was the only existing international network of art libraries of significant dimension with an impressive interconnectedness of institutions and people. However, on the way to the aim of finding a suitable solution for an innovative bibliographic tool, a number of fundamental hurdles had to be overcome. The sometimes slow and inflexible federated search technology had to be replaced by an infrastructure that corresponds better to the current habit of searching and navigating in comprehensive data pools. The demand for displaying a deduplicated hit list with facet-based filtering options, as well as different ranking criteria, had to be satisfied. It was recognized as indispensable to interconnect the catalog entries of the participating libraries with bibliographic data from additional sources such as repositories, bibliographies, publishers' archives, review databases, open access publishing platforms, e-journal collections, etc. And finally, and not to be underestimated, the outworking of the described vision was imaginable only when based on realistic, reliable, and long-term financial and operative fundaments. The latter seems to be a matter of course, but we must bear in mind that up to now the current artlibraries.net project has existed without any institutional basis and without any financial ground. Well, not to make it too exciting, a promising solution that satisfies all the mentioned requirements seems to be within our reach, and I'm happy to report on the first unexpectedly successful steps towards a new future-oriented model of a discipline-specific bibliographic information supply, which could even become a prototype for other disciplines and subject areas. Moreover, it has already a name: WorldCat Art Discovery. How does it work? The name of our brainchild reveals its principal relatedness to the WorldCat, operated by the Online Computer Library Center, OCLC, in Dublin, Ohio. The WorldCat is the most comprehensive bibliographic database in the world and comprises around 300 million records from more than 10,000 libraries on all continents and in dozens of countries. As a non-profit organization, OCLC funds a vast number of library services with the membership fees of the participating libraries. At our first meeting in 2010, when the FAB group was established, a possible collaboration with OCLC was already on the agenda due to the fact that North American libraries are used to engaging the services of OCLC as a standard, and that almost all of them send their catalog data to the WorldCat. Although European libraries have boosted collaboration with OCLC and the WorldCat, at the time, a solution for the FAB project initially seemed hard to imagine, admittedly because of scarce knowledge and a lack of experience with the WorldCat in the European part of the group. Concerns about subjection to a huge and inflexible operative structure, loss of identity and visibility, etc., led to an initial denegation to follow this path. However, thanks to an eye-opening report on the experiences of committee member Gert-Jan Koot with the WorldCat and its special feature for running a group catalog with the selected exposure of data from the WorldCat pool, our opinion started to change radically about 2 years later. Thus, conversations with OCLC representatives started in 2012. Step by step, a scenario for transferring the bibliographic data of artlibraries.net partners to the WorldCat and unifying them with the already existing data pool as well as with additional sources was developed and then presented in a prototype form at the biannual General Conference of artlibraries.net in Paris last year. Before analyzing the background, let us first look at this prototype. Although based on the enormous data pool of the WorldCat, a search in a group catalog exclusively filters out the records of those libraries that have been defined as members of a group. In any case, their records or holding information, respectively, have to be loaded to the WorldCat database beforehand. In other words, a group catalog is not an autonomous database, but simply a subset of the WorldCat. The search process Interface features and services are the same as in the standard version of the WorldCat. In our prototype, queries for bibliographic information are thus satisfied with access to records of selected art libraries, mirroring, at least in part, the concept of artlibraries.net. However, unlike in the current architecture of artlibraries.net, the WorldCat art discovery experiment does not depend on feedback from connected local catalogs, but on records stored in the WorldCat. The first and most important effect is the remarkably higher speed of obtaining results from a performed search. At the same time, a retrieval, or better, the discovery process, can be enriched with additional sources like bibliographical databases, here first and foremost for journal articles, full-text repositories, image collections, and the like. Already on this level, the list of hits will be remarkably richer than in the current artlibraries.net environment. The concern that such a result list could become too long and therefore unmanageable can be answered with an indication of the facets that allow convenient post-selective navigation through the results. Furthermore, thinking outside the box of our discipline can be easily supported with a single mouse click passing the query concerned to the complete WorldCat data pool. Due to time restrictions, I shall forego demonstrating further details and invite you instead to make your own experiences and discoveries with the prototype, which is still online and accessible without any limits. Just two closing remarks. The first is a clarification. The WorldCat Art Discovery Project does not aim to substitute in the short term the still existing and operating artlibraries.net environment, although it would be possible at least in theory. There are many objections, among them financial and political, which cannot be taken lightly. Thus, in the near future, there will be two international bibliographic networks running. However, since there are substantial differences between them, we do not see this as a problem. Furthermore, we can immediately integrate new art libraries into the WorldCat art discovery experiment that up to now have not been partners in artlibrary.net, but whose catalog data is already stored in the WorldCat. A few weeks ago, we sent out a call for participation in the WorldCat Art Discovery Project to the artlibraries.net partners in order to form a pioneer group which would initiate the experiment. The feedback was overwhelming. Approximately 30 libraries and consortia are willing to join the initiative and even to invest money. Contemporaneously, the Kress Foundation in New York and the Getty Research Institute expressed their readiness to cover higher initial investments, which will be inevitable to get the construction operating. All in all, the circumstances are so promising and so encouraging that it only seems to be a question of a short time before our vision becomes a tangible reality. The second closing remark refers to the conceptual identity of the model. It is evident that WorldCat Art Discovery combines all the above-mentioned qualities of modern library catalogs and their ability to interconnect with other catalogs and additional sources in order to obtain the most comprehensive amount of bibliographic information. As we have seen before, the WorldCat technology offers the required tools for filtering and selecting the results according to the user's strategy. Furthermore, the discovery process is enriched with data coming from sources that are not library catalogs and that have been generated with the help of fully computerized routines, like the indexation of tables of content of journals and collecting writings, for example. It is not a new version of a traditional bibliography that has been created, but rather an innovative approach to exploring the manifold landscape of information sources and information formats, so radically different to previous decades. In place of the former pre-selective authority of bibliographies and bibliographers, we are now giving room to the post-selective creativity and curiosity of the individual. This is not a targeted alienation of the traditional and still important as well as meritorious services of bibliographies. Rather, as a logical consequence, an invitation to make them part of this innovative discovery experience. Despite the emphasized reasons for optimism about the progress achieved in the project, a lot of substantial investments of knowledge, experience, and creativity still have to be made. Nevertheless, we are convinced we are on the right path, and what we are building right now, and with all our combined forces, could become a fertile ground for substantial developments which are dedicating to the future of art bibliography. Muchas gracias.